Adams Archive.
A mother in Oakland County, Michigan, was found guilty for involuntary manslaughter. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the most, by far, the craziest legal precedents being set that I have ever seen, which is the fact that now if your son or daughter commits a crime, you can be found guilty alongside of them. This is the first that I've ever heard of anything like this. There's very little case law that supports this. Nonetheless, I did want to walk through it with you because I find it to be very, very interesting. So, let's pull this up. Imagine living in a home where you keep your car keys on a hook by the door. A common slight in many households, this says. The setup is all too familiar. Now, let's say one day, while you're not paying attention, your teenager grabs those keys, takes the car for a spin without your permission, and ends up causing an accident. Suddenly, the blame shifts to you for simply having the keys accessible at home, despite never actually handing them over with the intention of letting your child drive unsupervised. This situation mirrors the complexities surrounding the Jennifer Crumbley case. It brings into focus the intricacies that are dancing between trust, responsibility, and foreseeability within the family unit. It questions the extent of parental liability for their children's actions, particularly when indirect access to potential harmful objects leads to unforeseen consequences. The discussion isn't just about who left the keys out, but about the broader implications of responsibility and control in a world where accidents can and do happen. Now, to be fair, it's not really an accident what happened, but nonetheless, I do think it's interesting to point out the similarities between the situation. The legal case against Jennifer Crumbly, the mother of the Oxford High School shooter Ethan Crumbly, marked a significant and unprecedented event in the United States legal system. Jennifer Crumbly was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in connection with the 2021 shooting carried out by her son, which resulted in the deaths of 4 students. This verdict represents the first incident in U.S. history where a parent has been charged and convicted in relation to a mass school shooting committed by their child. Here are the key facts surrounding the case against Jennifer Crumbly, the mother of the son in the Oxford school shooting. Now, let me give you some context on this because I think that's important, understanding the totality and the concern surrounding this case. Now, this is not me sympathizing with this mother. This is not me agreeing that she did everything right. This is not me saying that this situation could have been or could not have been prevented by proper parental duties being taken within this context, but it is me saying that this is a scary, absolutely terrifying legal precedents to set in today's world. So here's the situation. Ethan Crumbly, Oxford, Michigan. The shooting occurred on November 30th of 2021 in Oxford, Michigan. Ethan Crumbly killed 4 students and injured several others. The firearm used was a 9mm Sig Sauer pistol bought by his father and given to Ethan as an early Christmas gift. Ethan pleaded guilty to the charges of murder and terrorism, acknowledging his actions in the shooting. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jennifer Crumbly, his mother, was charged with involuntary manslaughter in connection with the shooting, making a significant legal action as it pertains to parental responsibility in such incidents. She was found guilty of the charges, making it a landmark case regarding culpability of parents for their children's actions when it involves access to firearms. Prosecutors argued that Jennifer and her husband, James Crumbly, were grossly negligent by failing to secure the firearms and ignoring warning signs of Ethan's potential for violence. Jennifer Crumbly's defense contended that she was not directly responsible for the actions of her son and that the tragedy was unforeseeable. As of the updates, she was charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 15 years each, totaling 60 years in prison as a result of this. So to me, this is a pretty serious case law being precedent being set for case law in the future, which is the fact that if your child does something wrong, should you be held legally liable as their parent? And I think that my response to that right off the cuff would be no. Your child has their own decision making. Your child has their own terrible potential for violence, but that doesn't make you, as the person who birthed them or as the person who housed them, responsible directly for their actions. And so this could be used in so many ways, and it parallels to me the authoritarian legal system that happens in North Korea. If you are found guilty of going against the North Korean government, they don't just punish you for the actions. They punish your parents. They punish your cousins. They punish your entire lineage as the result of your actions, whether justified or unjustified. And so are we going to start prosecuting every parent of every child under the age of 18 for every gang member under the age of 18, which again is one of the leading causes of gun violence in the country? Are we going to go after the parents of every individual in Chicago who's under the age of 18 who committed murder? Are we going to do that? Are we going to charge the parent of every child who committed theft? Are we going to charge the parent of every child who committed any crime at all? Because if this is the case law, if this is the precedent that we're setting, you have to go back to every single murder, every mass murder, every shooting, every beating, every assault charge, every shoplifting, every charge essentially ever, and prosecute the parents. But where does it stop? Why just the parents? Why not charge, I don't know, the gun manufacturer, which I'm pretty sure they've tried to do several instances. Why not charge the government for enabling all of this? Why not charge the school? Why not charge the company that created the car that got him there? Why not charge the company who made the clothes that he was wearing? This all seems ridiculous because it is. A human is its own separate entity with its own decision-making abilities, its own potential for doing massive amounts of good and great things in the world, and also massive amounts of evil and terrible things in this world. The decisions of your child do not directly, legally, at least shouldn't legally reflect the decisions of the parent. This is a conversation of nature versus nurture. Does your child have its own thoughts, its own ability to take action outside of the rights or the governor that is set by their parents? And so here are the different arguments. Let's give you an outline of the case. The prosecution argued that Jennifer Crumbly was grossly negligent for failing to secure the firearm and ammunition at home, thereby enabling her son's access to the gun. Okay. But that's not a charge in and of itself. They didn't charge her with negligence when it comes to firearms. They charged her with involuntary manslaughter. They highlighted that she and her husband ignored warning signs of her son's violent tendencies and mental health issues. Okay, fair. Pretty sure, if I recall correctly, that her son was hearing voices in his head, and the school went to them about it, and they didn't seek psychiatric help. Okay, that's fair. But I don't think that means that she murdered these children at all. It was also noted that she failed to alert Oxford High School that the family owned guns, including the handgun used in the shooting. Okay, I own firearms. I'm absolutely not going to call and alert my child's school as a result of that. Like if I called my child's school and said, hey, just letting you know, I own firearms, I'm pretty sure they would call the police on me because they would seem like a threat. So those are the arguments for the prosecution. The arguments for the defense was Jennifer Crumbly's defense argued that she was not responsible for buying or storing the gun used in the shootings. True. They contended that there was no clear warning signs that her son could commit such a crime, asserting that the tragedy was unforeseeable. Very true. And the defense argued that it was her husband, James Crumbly's responsibility to keep track of the gun and that Jennifer did not see signs of mental distress in Ethan that would require psychiatric intervention. Okay. Fair positions. So to me, it's like, how do you take that from, like, and how do you give this woman 60 years? There's people who have literally curb stomped somebody to death and they're serving less time than that. Like you're just sentencing this woman to death because she's what, 50 years old, like 60 more years, you're sentencing her to death. It says rationale behind the verdict. The jury, which included gun owners and people familiar with firearms, found Jennifer Crumbly guilty of involuntary manslaughter in all 4 counts, 1 for each student killed. The conviction was based on the argument that Jennifer Crumbly's negligence in storing firearms and ignoring her son's mental health and behavioral warning signs contributed significantly to the tragedy. This case can be seen as a potential precedent for holding parents accountable for their roles in enabling their children's access to firearms in shootings. But it says specifically school shootings, but I'm not going to harp on that because if this is the case, you have to go back however many times and prosecute the parents. Manslaughter in Michigan carries a penalty of up to 15 years in prison. Jennifer Crumbly's sentence was scheduled for April 9th, while James' trial on similar charges was set to begin in March. This landmark case underscores the legal and moral responsibilities of gun ownership and parental oversight, especially concerning securing firearms and attentiveness to children's mental health needs. Okay, so let's look at some of the philosophical arguments surrounding this. One argument of this being the argument in defense for Jennifer. Well, let's do the other side first, the argument against Jennifer Crumbly. From a moral standpoint, parents have a duty to care for both their children and society. This includes not only providing for their basic needs, but also ensuring they do not pose a danger to themselves or others. Virtue ethics, which focuses on the character and virtues of a moral agent, would suggest that part of being a good parent is instilling moral virtues in one's children and preventing foreseeable harm that they might cause. The concept of negligence highlights a failure in this duty of care. If there was signs of Ethan's distress for potential violence, ethical theories like utilitarianism, maximizing well-being, would argue, well, this is very specifically philosophical, not exactly what I was looking for, but nonetheless, the argument for the moral autonomy and unpredictability would say that the argument from a standpoint of moral autonomy that individuals are primarily responsible for their own actions. Basically what I've said. Ethical theories like existentialism emphasize the importance of individual choice and personal responsibility. In this view, Ethan Crumbly's actions, though tragic, were his own, making it morally problematic to hold Jennifer Crumbly responsible for the actions she did not directly commit. Yeah. The principle of unpredictability, and that really comes down to the word of involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary meaning that I didn't even myself commit this. Like that's probably the bigger legal situation that I would harp on if I was the legal counsel of this individual. Is like I would attack the word involuntary. Involuntary does not mean I didn't do it. Like voluntary means I did it purposefully. Involuntary means I did it unpurposefully, right? Like then how far can you take it? You want to talk about the butterfly effect? Like you ever seen the movie The Butterfly Effect? It's like, how far can we stretch the word involuntary until it means not only the mom, not only the dad, but the cousins and the grandparents and the owner of the house that they lived in and the manufacturer of the clothing that he wore and the gun manufacturer and the car manufacturer and the wheels that were on the car at the time that he drove to school and the school for being there and the desk that he sat in for not, like, how far can you stretch the word involuntary? Because to me, and if we look at like the legal, what is the legal definition of involuntary? Let's see if we can get an answer on that. But to me, you cannot convict somebody of something for involuntarily by proxy committing murder or manslaughter against somebody else when they weren't even within a mile of the situation that the murders were conducted in. Right? Like, how can you say that it's such a legal stretch to say that this woman was responsible for these children's death? And a terrifying legal precedent to set. Because then, as we talk about the judicial system being weaponized against anybody and everybody that's political opponents, right? And again, this is a tragedy. This is horrible. The kid that is responsible for this got life in prison, as he should have. If not, he should have got the capital punishment as a result of this. I'm not against that in this situation. He pleaded guilty. He said it was me. It was obvious that it was him. It was a horrific act. Tit for tat, eye for eye. Let the guy rot in jail, or eliminate the burden on our tax dollars for taking care of him after this horrific and terrible act. But to take this to the parents and say, you did this, you are responsible for this. Legally? Like morally, maybe. Morally, maybe you should have stepped in. Morally, you should have taken your child to see a psychiatrist. Morally, you should have locked the guns away. Morally, you should have done this and you should have done that and you should have notified the school and you should have done, like, morally, sure, make those arguments. And if we're talking about a Twitter thread where everybody's shitting on this mom for all the things that she should have done, sure, morally, she should have done more. But to set a legal precedence which says that she is now responsible for those children's deaths legally and needs to pay for it through time in prison until she dies is an absolute abuse of our justice system. And so I actually had somebody that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, that I have done jiu-jitsu with, that is a police officer, has been a private investigator, or not a private investigator, but an individual who has handled certain situations like this. But before I get to that, let's go ahead and read this article, which says that should parents be responsible for child's mass shooting? The jury says yes. Again, and it's not even like mass shooting, because that's not the legal precedence that's being set here. It's should parents be responsible for their children's unlawful acts? Jury says yes, because it doesn't just stop at mass shooting. It's going to be if your child commits vandalism, if your child gets into a car accident and they're at fault, if your child, whatever it is, this sets a terrible legal precedence. And it says, a school shooter's mother is headed to prison after a Michigan jury found her guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The verdict is the first of its kind in America and puts the onus of responsibility on parents in a way that has never been before seen in a mass shooting case. The question of whether parents should be held accountable for the murders committed by their boys has reverberations that date back to the Columbine shooting in 1999. Those 13 deaths in Littleton, Colorado are widely seen as the opening of a dark era in which American schools and towns have become shorthand for the mass murder of children. We shall see the effect over time, but if this does not get overturned by a court of appeals, and of course I expect there will be robust appeals, it sets an approach to parental responsibility. And I think over time it could actually be a very important case. Yes, that's my legal standpoint on this. This is setting a crazy legal precedence, not just for this case, because there are some super weird things about this mom. Like, they fled to a warehouse miles and miles away because they heard the police were looking for them, and like, not smart, not the thing to do. But also, this sets such a weird legal precedence. The trial garnered widespread attention given the severity of charges filed against the shooter's parents. What the outcome portends for similar tragedies in the nation's ongoing battle with gun violence. In 2020, for the first time, firearm-related incidents were the number one cause of death among children and teens. Okay. So, here's the situation. Here's the post that I found from somebody that I, again, respect highly. It says, I told them And it finally happened. 30-year career, 7 spent as a detective. 4 of those 7, I investigated crimes committed by juveniles and against juveniles. And again, I'm using this just as a platform to have the conversation and see both sides of this. Like, no venom against this person for posting it. Highly respect them. But it is an interesting person that I think has a lot of merit in this situation, more to speak on than I, who has a passionate opinion from a law enforcement perspective on this. And so here it is. It says, 30-year career, 7 spent as a detective. 4 of those 7, I investigated crimes committed by juveniles or against juveniles. Every morning, there would be 5 or 6 new cases on my desk, crimes that took place Friday night through Monday morning. The story was the same. Usually, the parent of a 12, 13, or 14-year-old child, the phone would ring at 8 a.m. sharp. My child is out of control. You have to do something about it. I would politely and tactfully tell them their child was their responsibility. To be a good parent, get involved in their lives, get them in counseling, basically supervise them. They generally push back. I don't have time for that. You have to do something. I would end the conversation by telling them, you do know you are responsible for your child's actions until they turn 18. They often replied, I can't possibly be held accountable for what my little Johnny does. Yes, you can. Today's verdict proves it. Accountability. Okay. So here's somebody calling the police and saying, my child is doing something that I don't agree with. I would like you guys to step in and do something. This person saying, well, that's not my job, sir. That's your job. Okay. And this is why, to me, it comes back to a psychological debate, which is nature versus nurture. Is a parent truly responsible for every action that their child commits? And not even that, because the child's going to school. The child's being influenced by teachers. The child's being influenced by principals, by social media, by all of these outside factors. It's not just the parent in today's world. In fact, more often than not, it's not the parent in today's world. Is it the Reddit threads that they're on? Is it the Instagram followers that they have that are commenting on their stuff? Is it, how many factors can you look at and say, okay, we're going to prosecute everybody this person has had contact with over the last 6 months for involuntary manslaughter, and hopefully they all go to jail for 60 days. 60 years. Sorry, not 60 days. It's like, how do you dwindle this down to its most important parts and say, okay, you, and you. You're all responsible for the actions of this individual, down to the point where if they go to jail for murder, you're going down too, buddy. It's like a RICO case against the entire family. Like, no. I don't see that as being the case. And it's, even when somebody's going to the police and saying, hey, my child needs help and I don't know what to do, you're saying, good luck, bud. And in that case, like, what if that was the parents of Crumbly saying, hey, my child's I'm thinking they're going to do this thing. Like, to what extent can you stop them? Can you lock them in a tower with a dragon in it for the rest of their childhood until they're 18 and you're no longer responsible for their actions? I don't see this as having a positive outcome. I don't see it. Like, I don't see case law that could be utilized in this way. And if you look at the State versus Norman, 1989 in North Carolina, here's a case law against it, which says, although dealing with self-defense, this case highlights the principle that individuals are primarily responsible for their own actions unless there is a clear, direct causation from another person's actions leading to the harm. If the Oxford shooter's mom was shown in text message saying, go to school, take this gun, and shoot those children, then yes, she should go to jail. And maybe not for involuntary manslaughter, that would be murder. Right? But she didn't do that. That wasn't the case. They're talking about negligence, which, if you go in that weird confiscated gray area of negligence, like, there's so many crazy ways that you can take this. Another one is that People versus Kevorkian. In Michigan, the Supreme Court has addressed issues of indirect involvement in criminal acts, focusing on direct causation. While not primarily analogous, Kevorkian's case, which dealt with assisted suicide, emphasizes the necessity of a direct link between the defendant's actions and the harm that occurred. Yes, for sure. Now, if we want to look at the case law against this, we have to go all the way back to 1944 and 1907, one being in Massachusetts, which is the Commonwealth versus Walensky, which said this case established that the precedents for gross negligence, where the owner of a nightclub was held liable for the deaths caused by a fire due to inadequate safety measures. The principle here is that the failure to prevent foreseeable harm can constitute criminal negligence. Even that's so shaky. Like, so shaky. Like, you're going to give them involuntary manslaughter for everybody who died as a result of a fire? Maybe in 1944, I guess. But even still, that just doesn't make sense to me that that person would be held responsible for that. Maybe the person who lit the fire should be responsible, right? It's like if somebody, sure, if there's an arsonist and they go to a nightclub and they light it on fire, that person should go to jail if people die. But the owner of the nightclub, for not getting their sprinklers changed on time, should not be responsible directly or indirectly or involuntarily for the deaths of those individuals to get 60 years in prison. The other case law this points to is 1907. The Michigan Supreme Court case dealt with a man who failed to get medical assistance for a woman who overdosed in his home, resulting in her death. He was initially convicted of manslaughter, although the conviction was later overturned. The case, however, discusses the duty of care and how failing to act can lead to criminal liability under certain circumstances. So to me, in my opinion, this is going to get turned in the Court of Appeals. I don't see how this legal precedent can be set because it just is such a Pandora's box of issues legally that could cause a ripple effect and a utilization and weaponization of the law against people who are just unknowing and not non-participants in crime, just due to their relationship with somebody, which in and of itself is not a illegal act. Like it's crazy to me that this is being set and she was convicted. And I guess we'll see the same thing happen with her husband until this goes through the Court of Appeals. And I could see this going all the way up to the Supreme Court because of the importance of the legal precedents that is going to be set as a result of this case.
Adams Archive.